which is all about the tissues that kind of make up the body. Okay, and this is going to be the, we're going to have one more chapter after this that's going to finish up our unit, and that's going to be the integumentary system. Okay, so we want to look at all the 4 different types of tissues that make up the body, and then again, you want to concentrate on making sure that you can identify them in the pictures as if we were kind of looking at them under the microscope, and then we want to know what the general function is and where they're going to be found in the body. Okay, so we've looked at tissues a little bit, or we looked at the organization of different levels in the body. So we looked at cells, now we're moving on to tissues, but we always want to make sure we understand the basic definition. Okay, so tissues are, again, they're going to be groups of cells. They're going to have a similar structure. They perform a common function, and then we're going to get 4 primary types, and then these are going to kind of interweave to kind of form the basic kind of fabric of the body. Okay, so we get these 4 types: epithelial, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Most of the chapter is going to be epithelial and connective, and then when you get to the end, there's only 3 types of muscles. There's only the 1 type of nervous system. So again, most of getting through this chapter, we get 2 weeks to get through this chapter, but a lot of it is going to be just focusing on that epithelial and the connective, and then just kind of finishing up with the muscle and the nervous tissue. Okay, so if we wanted to look at just exactly what's the basic function of each of these, my epithelial tissue is going to cover stuff for me. My connective tissue is going to support stuff. My muscle tissue is going to be the one that produces movement. And again, when we're talking about movement, we're talking about locomotion, but we're talking about manipulating my environment, moving things through the body. And then my nervous system, we've looked at a little bit already. And that's what we finish up this course with the last unit on the nervous system, but it's going to kind of control everything, okay? And then we want to look at the different types and just some more specific kind of functions of those different types. So tissues are organized into organs. So again, we're looking at that level, right? Cells, tissues, organs. Most organs are going to contain all 4 types of tissue. And then the tissue arrangement is going to determine the organ's structure, and it's going to determine what their capabilities are. And again, our structure is always going to determine what our function is going to be. So again, we're going to come back to that. Our body is going to be designed in a way where those structures are able to sort of produce or to do certain functions to the best of their ability. So we get this little picture, which just helps us kind of find each of the 4 types of tissues. And then again, in part 1 of this one, we're going to break it up into 3 parts. But part 1, we're going to look at that epithelial tissue. Okay, so here is epithelial tissue. So epithelial cells are going to form sheets of cells. We have 2 forms that occur in the body. Good multiple choice question, because a lot of us, we remember that our epithelial cells do our covering and lining epithelium, but we sort of forget about this glandular epithelium too, okay? So don't forget that for me. So number 1 is covering and lining epithelium. It's going to form the outer layer of the skin. It's going to line our cavities, and it's going to cover the walls and organs of the ventral body cavity, okay? And then number 2 is going to be the glandular epithelium, and it's going to make up the glands of our body. And for most of us, you'll do a lot of stuff on the glands kind of when you get to part 2 of anatomy and physiology, but most of the time you're looking at glands, you're looking at secretions, you're looking at producing hormones, sort of things like that, okay? So we'll look at those. That'll be the end of this part 1. So we're going to form boundaries between environments. We already said why that's important, because again, we're trying to maintain homeostasis. Nearly all substances received or given off by the body must pass through epithelial tissue. Okay, so therefore this epithelial tissue is going to play a role. And again, we want to concentrate on, hey, what's the function of all these things? Those are always really, really good questions for multiple choice. They're going to play a role in protection, absorption, filtration, secretion, and sensory reception. And again, a lot of times when we think of the skin, because that's going to be the main form of epithelial tissue that most people are familiar with, we can sort of say like, okay, what are the functions of that? And then we just have to add a couple in there. Okay, so again, try not to just kind of memorize it. Try to kind of think it through and be like, okay, this is a structure. What might these tissues be good at? So the 5 distinguishing characteristics of epithelium, it's going to have a polarity. And in this case, we're not talking about like a charge, like negative, positive. We're just talking about a specific kind of top and a bottom. It's going to have specialized contacts, and we're going to break each of these down. It's supported by connective tissue. It's going to be avascular, but it's going to be innervated. Okay, vascular always means we're talking about blood flow, right? Innervated always means we're talking about the nerves. And then we're going to have these regenerative abilities. So let's look at each one of these a little bit more closely. So in polarity, we're talking about this apical and this basal surface. And again, we're usually talking about a top and a bottom. But the apical, or the apex, is going to be the upper free surface. And we're going to see a picture here in a second. This is going to be the part that's exposed to the body exterior, or to the cavity of an internal organ. Okay, so this is the part that gets exposed to everything, and obviously when you're getting exposed to stuff, this is a part that's going to get damaged a little bit more easily. The basal surface is going to be our lower attached surface, and again we'll see a picture in a second. Adjacent to the basal surface is a thin supporting sheet called this basal lamina, and then my basal lamina is going to be this adhesive sheet. It's going to also act as a selective filter, and this is the important part, is that it's going to determine which molecules diffusing from the underlying connective tissue, because we're going to talk about where the tissues get their nutrients from, are allowed to enter the epithelium, and it's going to also act as a scaffolding for wound repair. Okay, so let's look at a picture here and just make sure we can find and kind of label everything. So this part is my epithelium, right? This is my apical, or my free, or my top surface, okay? And then there's going to be my basal surface, and then underneath that I get these different little layers. So I get a basal lamina, and then we'll talk about the reticular lamina in a second here too. But we want you to remember that this epithelial tissue, it's going to rest on this connective tissue, and the connective tissue is going to be really important because this is where it's going to get all of its nutrients from. Okay, so a good picture to come back to, especially as we're working through the rest of this part of the chapter. So number 2 is specialized contacts. So covering and lining epithelial cells are going to fit closely together because, again, we're trying to form these sheets and we're trying to form these barriers. They're going to use lateral contacts, good multiple choice question. They're going to use tight junctions, desmosomes, and again, we're trying to bind adjacent cells together. We're going to prevent cells from being separated, and we're also going to inhibit passage of substances between these cells. So again, we're trying to make this strong sort of sheet, and we're trying to sort of limit what can kind of pass through or filter things. Okay, so number 3 was supported by connective tissue, and we mentioned this a little bit already, but all epithelial sheets rest upon and are supported by connective tissue. So we had that basal lamina, now we get our reticular lamina. This is going to be the layer just deep to the basal lamina, is a fine network of collagen fibers, and they're going to belong to that underlying connective tissue that you saw in the picture a second ago, okay? And what we do is we form this basement membrane. So the reticular lamina and the basal lamina together form the basement membrane, and then your basement membrane, again, is going to reinforce the epithelial sheet. It's going to help resist stretching and tearing, and it's going to define this sort of epithelial boundary between the epithelium and the connective tissue, okay? So cancerous cells, and this is kind of why it's important, they're going to fail to respect that basement membrane boundary, and then this is going to allow them to sort of invade the tissues beneath. And then you say, okay, well, why is that important? Well, this is where all my blood flow is, right? My arteries, my veins. This is how cancer cells can kind of get into our circulation and sort of move around to all these other areas of the body. Okay, so once things start to spread and they start to go through these different layers, it gets much, much more dangerous. Okay, so we come back to this one and we find the epithelium. We find the apical surface, we find the basal surface, we find our basement membrane, which is the basal lamina and the reticular lamina, and then we see this connective tissue kind of underneath, and we can take a look at a tumor growth here, okay? But eventually what's going to happen is it's going to start to invade and sort of get into this underlying tissue and sort of get to where it can sort of start moving to all these other different little parts of the body. Okay, so that's why it's very, very important to sort of maintain these little boundaries and sort of catch cancer really early before it's had this chance to sort of start moving to all these different spots. So now we get to number 4. So it's avascular. Anytime you see vascular, you're talking about blood flow, but innervated. So avascular means that it contains no blood vessels, and especially when we get to the skin chapter in number 5, we're going to kind of understand a little more sort of why this happens. So I do not have my own blood vessels, okay, but I am innervated, so it does have nerves that supply that sort of area. And this is another important part. It's avascular, so it has to receive its nutrients from somewhere else, and it's going to receive nutrients from substances diffusing from the blood vessels in this underlying connective tissue. Okay, so it's getting all of its nutrients from those blood vessels in the connective tissue sort of underneath. It does not have its own blood supply. Okay, and a lot of things as we go through this whole course a lot of the questions are gonna come back to this sort of blood supply, knowing sort of what has a blood supply and what doesn't have a blood supply. Because again, you know, those nutrients are gonna determine how healthy tissues are gonna be too. So now we get to number 5, which was regeneration. So epithelium has a high regenerative capacity because again, it's gonna get damaged a lot, constantly exposed to friction, okay, constantly damaged by substances. And then this is the cool part, when the apical basal polarity, because we talked about polarity, and when those lateral contacts start to get destroyed, this is going to be a signal for your body to sort of start reproducing these cells. Okay, so it's another way that your body monitors and how it knows sort of when it needs to sort of start repairing things. Okay, so now we get to the important part for epithelial tissue. So we're going to talk about how do we classify it, and this kind of comes into play a lot more for our lab portion, where you have to be able to sort of look at the images, and you have to be able to tell me what exact type of epithelial tissue it's going to sort of be. Okay, and we'll do a little bit of practicing, and you have your practice exam that shows you the pictures, and those are the things that you really want to make sure that you can label when it comes to the practical exam. So each epithelial tissue has two names. The first part is going to indicate the number of cell layers. So first we're trying to say, do we have one layer or do we have a lot of layers? The second is going to describe the shape of the cell, and again we'll see some pictures and that'll start to make a little bit more sense. So based on the number of cell layers, we end up with simple epithelia, or we end up with stratified. So one layer versus more than one layer. Okay, so that's going to be that first part of the name is going to be simple or stratified, and then we're going to specify what sort of cells make up each type. So we get simple epithelial consists of a single layer, and again, you want to start thinking about, okay, if I just have a single layer, it's not going to be very protective for me, right? It's going to be too thin, so it's going to do something different. So these ones are going to be common where I do a lot of absorbing, I do a lot of secretion, I do a lot of sort of filtration, okay? And a lot of times you can guess, okay, where do we do those in the body? But I'm creating a thin epithelial barrier, but again, because it's so thin, it's not going to offer me a lot of protection, okay? So it comes back to, do I know what the function of each of these cells are going to be and sort of where they'll be found? So now we get to stratified. So stratified always is composed of two or more layers. They're going to be stacked on top of each other. Okay, these ones are going to offer more protection, so they're common in high abrasion areas where protection is needed. And again, I get the lining of my mouth, I get my skin surface. This is the important part too, is that they're going to be named according to the shape of the cell in that apical layer or that top layer. So I get all these layers stacked on top, but I get the name because it has more than one layer. It's going to be stratified, and then I get the other part of the name just based on what do those cells look like in that top layer. Okay, so let's look at kind of some pictures here, and we can see that this one, it's simple, right? Because I only have one layer of cells, and I see this one because it's going to be stratified because I have lots of layers, and a lot of times you're looking for the nucleus is kind of stacked up on top of each other. So three common shapes of epithelial cells. I have squamous cells. They're going to be squashed, right, flattened and scale-like. I have cuboidal cells. They're going to look like a cube. They're going to be box-like, almost as tall as wide. And then I have columnar cells, and they're going to be like a column. So they're going to be tall and column-shaped. And then again, we want to just make sure that we can kind of name each one of these correctly if we get it in a picture. So the nucleus of each of these common types of epithelial cells also conforms to the shape of the cell. And again, a lot of times we're going to look at the nucleus when we're trying to name things. So the nucleus of a squamous cell is going to be flattened. The nucleus of a cuboidal cell is going to be spherical, and then the nucleus of a columnar cell is going to be elongated. The columnar cells, the nucleus is also going to be kind of located to the bottom. But again, we'll see that in a picture here in a second too. Okay, so this is my classification based on cell shape. So again, I looked at how many layers, and now I'm looking at, what does that top layer of cells kind of look like? So squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Okay, and you can see again that the nucleus kind of takes the shape of the type of cell. So here is our simple squamous epithelium, and again we want to kind of know where it's going to be found, we want to know what the function is, and then we want to make sure we can label it. It's going to be flattened laterally, they're going to be thin and often very permeable, found where filtration, so everything that's simple is going to have something to do with filtration, exchange, running things through there and keeping everything safe. So found where filtration or the exchange of substances by rapid diffusion is a priority. And then again, I can go back to, okay, where do I do those things in the body, right? So my lungs, this is where I'm going to bring my air in. My kidneys are going to play a big role in filtration. So this is where those cells are going to be found. You're going to get two types in the body. And again, we get two little definitions here that are really good. Endothelium, and then I get mesothelium. So endothelium is going to be an inner covering. So it's my lymphatic, blood vessels, heart. I'm providing a slick, friction-reducing lining. And then again, this exceptional thinness is going to encourage the efficient exchange of nutrients and waste between the bloodstream and the surrounding cells. Okay, but endo is always going to mean inner. Okay, and again, good multiple choice question. Mesothelium is going to be the middle covering, and this one's going to be a little different. It's going to be found in the membranes lining the ventral body cavities and covering its organs. So this is my thoracic, abdominal, pelvic cavities. Okay, so another good just definitions that you want to sort of highlight and pay attention to. So here is our first picture, and again, what I suggest you do, because I gave you kind of like the study guide too for these, is that just like take pictures of these on your phone, and then just scroll through them, and just make sure that I know when I see this, I'm looking at simple squamous epithelium. And again, for your lecture or your practical exams, you have to give me the full name, okay? So you'll get 1 point if you just tell me that it's epithelium, and then you'll get the other point if you tell me that it's simple squamous, okay? But simple means it's just a single layer. Squamous means that those nucleuses are going to look squished. And here's a zoomed in picture, okay? But these are the pictures that I'm actually going to use. So you want to, again, just get really, really familiar with and just go over them a bunch of times until you know them really, really well so that you can make sure you get all the points that you can get, okay? So simple squamous epithelium. Now I go to simple cuboidal, and I want to start thinking when I see the name, okay, single layer, and then it's going to be cuboid, they're going to be square-legged, they're going to have those nice round nucleuses. So single layer of cells as tall as they are wide, important in secretion absorption because they're still simple. They're going to form the walls of the gland ducts, and they're going to form the walls of the kidney tubules is where they're going to be found, okay? And here is my simple cuboidal, and again, you can take one of these little cells, and I can see the little square with the nice little nucleus in the center, okay? But again, take pictures, practice labeling, make sure you get these, and again, make sure you can tell me that this is simple cuboidal epithelium. And then for your lecture stuff, it's more where is it going to be found. So in the practical stuff, I'm just going to ask you to identify stuff, and then in the lecture stuff, it's more where is it going to be found and what the functions are going to be. Okay, so now we get to simple columnar, and again, I think, okay, now I'm going to have single layer, but I'm going to have my stretched out cells with the nucleus at the bottom, important for absorption and secretion. These ones are going to line the digestive tract. They can also have cilia, which are just little kind of hairs they kind of stick up that you can see under the microscope, and these are going to help me sort of move substances or cells through the passageways. Okay, so here are my little columnar cells, and I can see that they're kind of long and stretched out nucleus located right at the bottom. But again, single layer, and then again I look for the nucleus and the shape of the nucleus. And then when we move to the stratified, we'll do the same thing, multiple layers, but we'll look for, okay, what does that top layer kind of look like? And these pictures are also great from your textbook. We're very lucky where we have a great textbook, but this gives you a little summary, okay, of sort of all the things that you're going to look for in order to identify it. It's going to give you a little summary of the function, going to give you a little summary of the location of where I might be able to find these things. So after you've studied and you kind of do, these are great things to just kind of photocopy and keep and just be able to go through things real quickly and have all the information that you're going to need for your test. So here's a zoomed in picture, and again I can see the columns, and I can see that little stretched out nucleus. And now we get to pseudo-stratified columnar, and this one's a little tricky, okay, which is why we kind of bring it up. But they're going to vary in height. All cells are going to rest on this basement membrane. Only the tallest reach the free surface. But what happens is that you have these cell nuclei, and these ones are going to lie at different levels. And when you look at the picture, it's going to look like it's stratified, okay? But it's one of these ones where it just looks stratified. They're actually just individual little cells. Okay, so I put this one up there because, again, if it shows up on your practical, you want to be like, okay, this is just that one where it looks like it's stratified, but it's actually just simple. So pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. And you can see the little cilia really, really good on here. Okay, so here's a little zoomed in view. And now we get to the stratified part, okay? And again, you want to always give me, with the pictures, you want to tell me the basic type that it is, but to get the full points, you got to give me the full name. So stratified epithelia are a little bit different. They're going to contain 2 or more cell layers. They're going to regenerate from below. You're going to have the basal cells divide and push apically or towards the top to replace older cells. This is going to be a common theme, especially when we get into the skin chapter, okay, where we're going to make things real low and sort of push them up to the surface. Considerably more durable because I have more layers, and then these again are going to be, they're not so much absorption, filtration, their major role is going to be protection. So stratified squamous epithelium. Most widespread of the stratified epithelium. Anytime you're going through your chapter and it says most common, most widespread, anything like that, you always want to start and highlight that because those are good multiple choice questions. Again, composed of several thick layers, which allows it to be more protective. The free surface cells are going to be squamous. Okay, so that's how I get the name, right? So stratified, more than one layer. Squamous is what does that top layer look like. The deeper layers can be cuboidal, they can be columnar. Going to be found in areas subject to wear and tear. The surface cells are constantly being rubbed away and replaced. receives nourishment from deeper connective tissue, like we already talked about, and therefore those farther away are less viable. This is another really important kind of concept, to be like, the farther something is away from its nutrients, the less healthy it's going to be. And when we get to those skin chapters, you're going to realize that, that top layer of our skin is basically just dead, okay? And your hair is kind of the same, where we have these sort of layers at the bottom that are healthy, but as we push them away, we sort of end up with these dead layers that sort of just keep us really, really safe and give us this nice little barrier. Okay, so stratified squamous epithelium forms the external part of the skin. The outer layer is going to be keratinized, and again, we do a whole bunch of info on the skin in Chapter 5, but basically keratinized just means that it has this tough protective protein in there. Okay, and we'll look at keratin and melanin and all those things when we move into the other chapters. The remaining layers are non-keratinized, okay, but I have this protective layer sort of built into this skin. So here is a picture of my stratified squamous. So again, I want to look at, okay, more than one layer makes it stratified, and then squamous, I look at the top layer, and I can see that I have these squished little nucleuses, okay? So again, practice your pictures, go over all those things, make sure you know these really, really well. I've said it a bunch of times, but you want to really make sure you do really, really well on your practicals, okay? Because the lecture exams are always a little harder. There's a lot more information. They can be a lot more trickier. If you do really well in your practical, it takes a lot of stress off, and then you have a little more leeway when you move into those lecture exams. So stratified squamous epithelium, zoomed in picture. Now we get to stratified cuboidal epithelium. So I get 2 layers of cuboidal cells, quite rare in the body. This is another one. If there's something that's like most common in the body, again, that's the one you want to focus on. This one is, again, quite rare, mostly found in ducts of some larger glands, sweat glands, mammary glands. And we get to stratified columnar epithelium, also has limited distribution in the body. Only apical layer of cells is columnar. Okay, small amounts are found in my pharynx, male urethra, glandular ducts. Okay, so again, not super, super common in the body. So if you're gonna, if there's a multiple choice question and you're looking at stratified epithelium, you want to remember that stratified squamous is going to be the one that's the most common and kind of found everywhere. Now we get to another cool one, which is this transitional epithelium. So it's going to form the lining of the hollow urinary organs. And the cool thing about them is that they're going to be able to have this ability to kind of stretch, okay? So the lining is going to stretch. It's going to flatten as that organ fills up. So as your bladder sort of fills up, these cells are going to stretch. It's going to be approximately 6 to 3 layers. The apical cell's appearance is going to vary based on that stretching. Okay, so just another cool thing that your body does. So this ability to change shape, transition, kind of gives it its name, but it's going to allow for a greater volume of urine to flow through and to be stored. And then we get our little picture here. Okay, so transitional epithelium. And now we get to the last part of the first part of the chapter, which is when we're looking at epithelium, we're going to look at the glandular epithelium. So again, you want to remember that it's covering and lining, but it's also going to make up our glands for us. And then I'm going to try to point out just the most important things that you want to remember about the glands. So a gland consists of one or more cells that make and secrete a particular product, okay? And then that product is going to be called a secretion. It's going to be mostly this water-based solution. It's going to contain some proteins. It's going to contain some lipids. Your cells are going to obtain needed substances from your blood to make this product, okay? So they're going to transform that product, and then it's going to be discharged into the body. So glands are classified according to 2 traits. So again, we get some good multiple choice questions here and some good definitions. They're going to be classified based on where they release their product. So they're going to have endocrine glands and we're going to have exocrine glands. So endocrine glands are going to secrete internally. Exocrine glands are going to secrete externally. So pretty simple. And then they're also going to be classified by the number of cells. So we're going to have unicellular ones and we're going to have multicellular ones. So one cell versus many cells. So here are my endocrine glands. So they're going to produce hormones for me. So these are messenger chemicals. They're going to be secreted by exocytosis, and I'm going to secrete them into that extracellular space, right? So the part on the outside part of the cell, there they can kind of enter the bloodstream, lymphatic system, and they can go to wherever they're supposed to go, okay? But they're going to travel to specific target organs Each hormone is going to prompt its target organ to respond in some characteristic way. So they are very, very specific, okay, and they're working on specific organs. And the example they give you in the textbook is you have hormones that cause your pancreas to release digestive enzymes, okay. So this is, again, just another way that my body kind of controls what's going on and sort of maintains its homeostasis and tells the organs in my body how much of something they should be producing at any particular time. Exocrine glands, a little bit different. All exocrine glands secrete their products onto body surfaces, which can be the skin, or into body cavities. Again, they can be unicellular, they can be multicellular, okay? But these are my mucus, sweat, oil, salivary glands. My liver is going to secrete bile. My pancreas is going to secrete digestive enzymes, okay? But they're secreting them onto body surfaces or into body cavities. Now we get another classification, so we can classify these glands by structure versus their type of secretion. So if I'm classifying them by structure, they're going to be unbranched versus branched. Okay, so I have simple, which are unbranched, and then I have compound ones, which are going to be branched. And then I also have, I can classify them based on their secretory units. So some glands are going to use a tube, and some are going to use a sac. So I can have tubular ones that are going to use tubes. I can have alveolar ones, which are going to use this hollow cavity, or they're going to form these small sacs. And then I have this tubulo-alveolar, which are going to use both types. Okay. So again, I just want to always be able to sort of go back and be like, okay, I have my glands. They're going to be broken down into endocrine versus exocrine. I can classify them based on their number of cells. Do they have one cell? Do they have a lot of cells? Okay, and then I want to just make sure that I'm familiar with the definitions that kind of go. So endocrine, exocrine, and then I want to be able to make sure that I know that I can classify them by their structure, or I can classify them by the type of their secretion. So we looked at the structure one, and then this is where most of your questions are going to kind of come from based on your glands. Okay, so we can classify glands by their modes of secretion, and what we end up is with three types. Okay, we get this merocrine gland, we get a holocrine gland, and we get this apocrine gland. Okay, and you want to basically just understand sort of, what is the main way that they're going to secrete their product. Okay, so merocrine means that they're going to merely secrete, and this one's kind of nice because it starts with an M, and merely secretes kind of starts with an M. It's also going to be the most common. Okay, so merocrine glands are going to secrete their products by exocytosis as they are produced. This comes up in a lot of multiple choice questions too, is that which one, is the secretory cell not altered? So I'm going to make sure that we list this here. So merocrine is going to be the one where the secretory cell of the gland is not going to be altered. And the examples of these ones are the pancreas, sweat glands, salivary glands. Okay, so it's merely secreting. You're going to understand as we look at the other ones kind of why that's important. Okay, so here's a picture of a merocrine gland. Now we want to look at the holocrine gland. This is one that everybody kind of remembers. So in this one, we're going to accumulate these products within, okay, until they rupture. And again, this is another good multiple choice question, is like which one of these is going to rupture, and it's going to be the holocrine. And the way I used to always remember this is, one of my favorite places is Hawaii. So Hawaii starts with an H. Holocrine starts with an H. What do you have in Hawaii? You have all the volcanoes, and they're going to kind of rupture or erupt. So that always kind of helped me sort of remember which one is which. But you want to remember that the holocrine is going to be the one that's going to sort of rupture. Okay, so it's replaced by the division of cells underneath. And then the best example of this one is going to be your sebaceous oil glands. And we're going to come back to look at the glands again a little bit more in depth when we get into the skin chapter. Okay, so here's my holocrine, the one that ruptures. And then we get to the last one, which is the apocrine gland. These ones may not exist in humans, okay? So they're going to accumulate their products just beneath the free surface. And then what these ones are going to do is that they're going to sort of pinch off, okay? So pinch off and release secretory granules, and then the process is going to kind of repeat. So again, you want to know which one just merely secretes, which one ruptures, and then which one is going to sort of pinch off, because again, it's, these are perfect kind of multiple choice questions. And what you guys want to do is you sort of go through all your science classes. At this point when you're reading through the chapters, you can get really, really good at sort of reading stuff and kind of being like, okay, this is a perfect multiple choice question, and you would be amazed at how good you can get at when you're going through your chapter, sort of picking out things that are going to show up on your test. Okay, so that's the end of part 1 of chapter 4. So we looked at epithelial tissue. Again, you want to start practicing your labeling. we're going to come back tomorrow, the next day, and I'm going to post the one on the connective tissue, and then we'll finish up with the muscles and the nervous tissue.